case of Michelle Missy. In the quiet suburbs of Southern California, the disappearance and tragic death of Michelle Yvette Missy Avila deeply shook a close-knit community. Her story is one of friendship, betrayal, and a devastating loss that left an indelible mark on those who knew her. The vanishing of Missy Avila caused shockwaves in the community, as friends, family, and law enforcement mobilized in a desperate search to find her. The quest to uncover the truth behind her disappearance would reveal a disturbing tale of betrayal among those she trusted. Missy was known for her bright smile and caring nature, a young woman with dreams of a promising future. As the details surrounding her disappearance emerged, the heartbreaking story of friendships turned sinister captivated the nation's attention. This is the story of Michelle Yvette Missy Avila, her whose life was tragically cut short. Missy was born on February 8, 1968 and grew up in our later Los Angeles. She lived with her mother and 3 brothers and attended San Fernando High School with her 2 best friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. Missy and Karen had been best friends since they were 8 years old, but the girls started to drift apart once they entered high school. Missy was very beautiful and had very long hair, which she loved, and she was quite popular and well-liked by most of her peers. Karen and Laura began to feel envious of the attention Missy received from others, especially from boys. During Missy's sophomore year of high school, a rumor began to spread that claimed Missy had been engaging in sexual relationships with several boys, all of whom had girlfriends. This rumor prompted a group of girls to confront Missy outside of school and assault her severely. As soon as Missy got home, her parents pressed charges against the ringleader of the attack, Sonia Bond. Missy was expected to appear in court on October 8, 1985 to testify against Sonia, but she would sadly never get that opportunity. Earlier in September, Missy had a falling out with both Karen and Laura due to the same rumor that had been spread a year earlier, in which Missy was accused of having sexual relationships with her friends' boyfriends. This time, the 2 girls involved were her best friends, Karen and Laura. Missy began dating a boy named Randy earlier in their junior year, but their relationship only lasted around a month before Missy broke things off, as she couldn't stand his constant partying. Not long after, Karen and Randy started dating and moved in together. However, Randy still had feelings for Missy, and Karen saw him flirting with her. Missy turned Randy down and told him she wasn't interested in rekindling their relationship. Missy also tried to be a good friend by telling Karen she should consider ending the relationship with Randy and try to find a better boyfriend. This angered Karen, and she and Laura spread rumors again and decided to confront Missy at one of the parks in their neighborhood. Missy tried pleading with them, telling them she would never betray either of them like that, and that these were the same rumors that were spread the year prior. Eyewitnesses claimed that Karen was seen shouting at Missy, threatening her with a broken beer bottle, pushing her to the ground, and slapping her before she and Laura stormed off. This incident occurred 10 days before Missy's murder. Not long after that incident, Laura expressed regret and contacted Missy, and the 2 of them decided to put everything behind them and continue with their friendship. However, Karen was still avoiding Missy until October 1st, when she contacted Missy and sincerely apologized to her about everything that had escalated between them. This meant a lot to Missy, as she had started to miss her friends, and the trio made plans to hang out at Stonehurst Park later that same day. On October 1st, 1985, Missy told her mom that she made plans to hang out with her friends and her mom gave her permission to go, but she had to be back home by 6 p.m. Missy went outside and waited for Laura to pick her up. After Laura picked her up, the girls drove around for a while before making their way to Stonehurst Park, where they parked the car and waited for Karen to show up. A few minutes passed and Karen pulled into the parking lot with their other friend, Eva, in the passenger seat. That's when things took a turn for the worse for Missy. When Karen entered the parking lot, she parked extremely close to Laura's car, rolled down her window and began yelling at Laura. Laura also rolled down her window and started yelling back at Karen. Missy and Eva just sat there, shocked, watching their friends shout abusive things at each other. Missy had no idea what they were arguing about. Suddenly, Karen backed up and sped out of the parking lot, and Laura followed her for 45 minutes. They drove recklessly north of the city and into the mountains, both girls driving with such extreme anger that Missy and Eva were begging the girls to calm down and pull the cars over. The girls drove right into a parking lot that led to a huge forest. Laura and Karen got out of their cars, confronted each other, and continued to fight. Missy got out of the car in an attempt to stop her friends from fighting. However, as soon as she left the car, Karen and Laura suddenly ceased their argument, turned their attention to Missy, and approached her aggressively. They got so close to Missy that she was unable to re-enter the car or move away from it. Karen then laughed at Missy and informed her that they were not actually fighting and had no animosity towards each other, but rather they were angry with Missy. They revealed that the entire situation was a ploy to lure Missy into the woods so that they could confront her and teach her a lesson. They then shouted at Missy and explained that they had spread the rumors because they knew for a fact that she had slept with their boyfriends and they were not going to let her get away with it. Missy tried pleading with them, telling them again that she would never do anything like that she never slept with anyone, but they wouldn't listen. When Missy started to shut down, the girls grabbed her and pushed her away from the car and towards a trail that led into the forest. Given that Missy was quite petite compared to the other girls, being only 4 feet 10 and 95 pounds, while Karen was 5 feet 2 and over 200 pounds, and Laura was 5 feet 6 and 135 pounds, Missy was unable to defend herself against the constant pushes by the two girls as they forced her to walk further down the trail. Eva was in the car during the entire altercation. She finally got out of the car and started walking behind the group. Eva was not involved in anything the girls did in the forest, and she didn't even know why she was brought along in the first place. When the group was out of view from the parking lot and deep into the forest, Laura stopped and faced Missy, who was crying helplessly and scared, and punched her right in the face. As soon as Laura started punching her, Karen joined in, and within seconds, Missy was on the ground, being beaten, punched, and stomped on. When they stopped, Laura pulled out a knife, grabbed Missy by the hair, and started cutting off chunks of her hair. They did this intentionally because they knew how much Missy loved her beautiful long hair. Karen wanted to join in on the hair cutting, but since she didn't have a knife, she just started pulling out chunks with her hands while Eva stood there watching it all happen. After they had finished that activity, they produced restraints, bound Missy's arms behind her back, and gagged her. Since there was a river around 10 feet away from their location, Laura walked into the stream, looked directly at Missy, began running her hands through the water, gave Missy a smirk, and started taunting her, asking her to come into the water with her. When Missy did not move, Karen seized her, forcefully stood her up and shoved her towards the river, causing her to fall down the hill. Since her arms were restrained behind her back, her face slammed down onto the ground, and she rolled up to the river. Laura and Karen then grabbed her and dragged her into the water. That's when Eva hastily ran back up the trail to the cars. Upon arriving at the cars, Eva realized that both vehicles were locked and too far to fetch assistance. She reluctantly started walking back down the trail until she heard a terrifying scream. She stopped, turned around, and swiftly ran back to the cars, where she lay on the ground in a fetal position and waited for approximately an hour for the girls to return. Eventually, she saw Laura and Karen, who were dripping wet and smiling and laughing. But Missy was not with them. Laura and Karen were holding Missy's body in the water that was 8 inches deep. The scream that Eva heard happened when Missy was briefly able to get her head above the water, but then Karen grabbed her head and pushed it back into the water. When the girls realized that Missy was near death, they released her, ran to a large log and dropped it on her head. The girls then left the forest, got into their cars with Eva, and went home. For hours later, Laura called Missy's mother, Irene Avila, claiming that she had dropped Missy off with 3 boys driving a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura said she returned to the location, but Missy and the boys had already left. On October 4th, 1985, Missy's body was found face down in a stream in Big 2 Hanger Canyon in Angeles National Forest 3 days later by a group of hikers. Police found that she had been forcibly drowned in 8 inches of water and her waist-length hair had been cut off. A 4-foot log was found on top of her body and cigarettes. Beer and men's overalls were found near where her body was discovered. The girls told Missy's parents and the detectives that Missy had gone off with 2 men in a blue Camaro before she disappeared, which made the random items around the crime scene seem more plausible. This false claim sent the detectives on a fruitless investigation for the non-existent men for 3 years. Irene later said she had no reason to suspect Karen or Laura were involved in her daughter's death because both of them attended Missy's funeral, and Laura sent the family a sympathy card with $20. Karen also moved in with Missy's family for a long time, outwardly showing support and trying to help catch the killers, all while closely monitoring the investigation and attempting to divert the investigators from her own involvement. Karen was intensely focused on the murder, frequently visiting Missy's grave, covering the walls of her room with pictures of Missy and newspaper articles about the crime, and repeatedly returning to the creek where Missy's body was discovered. At one point, she even told Irene that she had seen Missy's ghost. After 3 years, on July 26, 1988, Eva Chirumbolo, the other teenager who had taken the 45-minute drive into the mountains, finally came forward and told the police everything that had happened. She explained the rumors, the falling out, the anger, and the jealousy, as well as the details of the murder. Eva said she took so long to come forward because the other two girls had threatened to kill her if she ever revealed what she had seen. In March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The jurors were not convinced that the murder was planned, and they rejected the first-degree murder charge. Karen Severson was released from prison on December 9, 2011, after serving 21.5 years, and Laura Doyle was released from prison in December 2012, after serving 22 years. Karen Severson attempted to profit from her crime by writing a memoir about the murder and her prison life, but the book did not do well. She also made a deal for a movie to be made about it, but Avila's family sued her in 2015, seeking to take the profits from the sales. As a result, the state of California passed Missy's law, requiring entities who are helping publish works made by criminals to contact the families of the victims about the said works. Missy's story has sparked conversations about the impact of bullying, the complexities of teenage relationships, and the importance of fostering a culture of empathy and kindness. Community initiatives and support networks have emerged to provide resources and support for those affected by similar experiences. As we remember Missy, we honor her memory by working to create a world where friendships are built on trust and compassion. Her legacy serves as a reminder that every individual deserves respect, kindness, and the opportunity to live a life free from harm. In the end, Michelle Yvette Missy Avila's legacy will be one of resilience and hope. May her memory inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those affected by betrayal, and work towards a future where understanding and empathy prevail. The case of Hannah Clark. Hannah Clark was born on September 8, 1988. By 2020, she was a devoted mother of 3 young children, 2 sweet girls, Aaliyah and Liana, and a rambunctious boy named Trey. Hannah's loved ones remember her as a kind and gentle soul with a bright smile that could light up anyone's heart. She was a selfless and caring mother who gave her all to her children. Hannah's family life was marked by her relationship with her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, a rugby player for the New Zealand Warriors team. Despite their significant age difference, they formed a strong bond, which deepened over time. Sue Clark, Hannah's mother, struggled to accept Rowan, but Hannah refused to listen to her concerns. People close to Rowan shared negative opinions about him. Sue, Hannah's mother, had a nagging feeling that something was off about Rowan. She perceived him as arrogant and self-centered, which made her uneasy. She was also concerned about the significant age gap between Rowan and Hannah. When they first met, Hannah was a recent graduate while Rowan was 31 years old. Additionally, Rowan's past relationships were a worry for Sue, particularly since he was still in the process of divorcing his previous wife and was living with her at the time. When Hannah introduced Rowan to her parents, they questioned him about his ex-wife. Rowan explained that he was staying with her due to their son. Eventually, Rowan finalized his divorce and continued his relationship with Hannah. In 2011, he proposed to her and she accepted. They got married in Kingsley, New South Wales, Australia. The following year, they had 3 children together. Hannah and her family, including her father Rowan, were passionate about sports. However, Rowan's muscular physique developed during his professional athlete days was partly due to steroid use, which led to mental health issues. As a personal trainer, Hannah's approach differed from her father's. She was loved by her clients for her kindness, empathy, and dedication, earning her a loyal following. Rowan's approach to training was unique, but his behavior was marred by aggression and inappropriateness, likely caused by steroid use. This made him a poor trainer, as clients don't need someone who makes them feel uncomfortable. Rowan struggled to communicate effectively with people, which negatively impacted his career and finances. As a result, his wife Hannah had to become the primary breadwinner, which further irritated Rowan. He felt emasculated by her success as she was doing a better job than he was. Despite their financial struggles, they decided to open their own fitness club. However, this decision was largely driven by Rowan's desire to control Hannah's every move and monitor her whereabouts. Rowan's behavior in the store mirrored his past actions at the gyms where he worked. He often felt the need to assert superiority over women. During a private training session with Sue's mother, he showed his cruel side, acting inappropriately instead of showing respect. He dropped Sue, causing her to hit her head and bleed, and laughed at her clumsiness, showing no sympathy. Despite this alarming behavior, Hannah's parents tried to accept him for their daughter's sake. Rowan's control over Hannah was all-encompassing, and he isolated her from her family and friends. He dictated who she could see and when, and even forbade the children from visiting their grandmother and Hannah from communicating with her brother, whom he disliked. As a result, Hannah felt trapped and enslaved, confined to the walls of her own home. Rowan's behavior towards Hannah was also emotionally and physically abusive. He would demand intimacy from her, and if she refused, he would become enraged, taking out his anger on her and the children. After forcing himself on her, he would then apologize insincerely, attributing his behavior to a burst of passion. Hannah's life was slowly under the constant control and cruelty of her husband, Rowan. Their marriage, once filled with love and passion, had degenerated into a nightmare of fear and submission. Rowan's tyrannical behavior had created a toxic environment where Hannah lived in constant terror of his wrath. Rowan's cruelty was not limited to Hannah. He also targeted their children. While some playful exchanges between parents and children are normal, Rowan frequently crossed the line, intentionally hurting and belittling them. When the children cried, he would mock them, showing no empathy or respect for their feelings. For example, a conflict between Rowan and his daughter Aaliyah turned disastrous when Rowan used excessive force, causing Aaliyah to hit her head. The injury was severe enough to require hospitalization and stitches. Instead of taking responsibility and apologizing, Rowan blamed Aaliyah for the incident. This was not an isolated incident, as Rowan had a history of tormenting his children. As an athlete, he would take ice baths after training, but he would also force his children, including his young son Trey, to sit in icy water, disregarding their tears and pleas for mercy. In the same year, Hannah's life took a drastic turn for the worse. Rowan, who had recently become interested in jiu-jitsu, returned home from a training session one day, still pumped up with adrenaline. Without warning, he physically attacked Hannah, grabbing her throat with a tight grip and uttering terrifying words. Consumed by fear, Hannah didn't immediately recognize that she was experiencing domestic violence. However, this incident was far more frightening than anything she had previously endured. As a result, Hannah made up her mind to leave Rowan at the earliest chance. After reaching out to the police, she provided a detailed account of the horrific experience to the officer. The police officer informed Hannah that forcing an intimate relationship without consent is a form of domestic violence. This conversation was a turning point for Hannah, helping her understand the situation and prompting her to take immediate action. She quickly gathered her children and left for her parents' house, trying to escape the abusive situation. Although their divorce was not yet finalized in November 2019, Hannah made the decision to allow Rowan to spend time with their children. However, she was aware that she had no legal authority to control this arrangement without a court's intervention. Even so, Hannah was still uneasy about leaving the children in Rowan's care. To fix this problem, Rowan was struggling to cope with his emotions and sought help from his church's pastor, Christopher. Christopher was a kind and supportive person who was always willing to listen. However, as Rowan began to open up to him, Christopher noticed some disturbing traits. Rowan had a desire for dominance and control, which he occasionally revealed when his confidence faltered. During one of these moments, Rowan confessed to Christopher that he was aware his actions were wrong and wanted to change, but didn't know how. Rowan's admission was a crucial step towards reform, and Christopher's guidance could have been instrumental in helping him. However, before progress could be made, a shocking event occurred. Hannah and her children were walking down the street when Rowan suddenly appeared out of nowhere, grabbed their daughter Lion, and disappeared. Hannah's life was turned upside down by unbearable anxiety and fear for her daughter Lion's safety. For 2 agonizing days, she had no idea where Lion was, and her distress grew by the minute. Hannah turned to the police, who launched a search and eventually found Lion safe and sound with her father. Although Lion was unharmed, the traumatic experience left a lasting impact on Hannah. The police, recognizing the danger that Hannah and her children faced, urged her to file a police report against her ex and obtain a protection order. However, despite the problems her ex, Rowan, had caused, he still had joint custody of the children, which he used to continue manipulating and abusing Hannah. After a meeting with Rowan, the children were returned to Hannah's parents. However, before leaving, Rowan attempted to humiliate Hannah by displaying pictures of her in her underwear on his car, in plain sight of their children. Hannah, enraged, tried to remove the photos, but Rowan responded violently. He grabbed her shoulder, twisted her arm and punched her in the face, splitting her lip. The attack was only stopped when Hannah's mother, Sue, intervened. As Rowan drove away, he yelled insults. Hannah, traumatized, immediately reported the incident to the police, as it was a clear violation of the protection order. Unfortunately, the authorities were unable to respond in time, which ultimately led to a tragic outcome. It was a typical morning on February 19, 2020. Hannah grabbed her car keys and left her parents' house to drop off her 3 kids at kindergarten. Hannah and her children got into the car, but before they could leave, Rowan jumped in, causing Hannah to become frightened for their safety. She tried to calm Rowan down, but he was furious and began yelling threats and ordering Hannah to start the car and drive away. Hannah carefully drove off, trying not to escalate the situation. As she turned onto Raven Street, the car stopped. In a desperate and vengeful act, Rowan grabbed a canister of gasoline from under the car seat and drenched Hannah and her children with it. Michael ZCK, who happened to be nearby, witnessed the horrific scene. He said that earlier that morning, he had heard a car pull up outside his house. Hannah, frantic and pleading for help, screamed that Rowan was trying to kill her and pouring gasoline all over them. As Hannah begged for mercy, Rowan refused to let her go, his face twisted in a rage. Michael rushed to the car and was met with Rowan's emotionless face, holding a lighter in his hand. In the next moment, the car erupted in flames. The explosion was followed by blood-curdling screams, a deafening ringing, and then an eerie silence. Luckily, Hannah had narrowly escaped the inferno, but was left with severe burns and bleeding. Frantically, she pleaded for assistance, not for her own suffering, but for her children who remained trapped in the blazing car. A car happened to drive by, and a doctor who was not on duty stopped to offer assistance. Seeing Hannah's distress, the doctor rushed to her side. Meanwhile, Michael intervened quickly, grabbing a hose from his house to try and extinguish the flames. However, the fire was too intense, and it engulfed the entire car, leaving no hope of rescuing the children. The doctor and Michael yelled at Hannah to take cover and get away from the fire, but she was too consumed by grief to hear them. With growing desperation, Michael rushed to the car to rescue the children, but the intense flames and scorching heat thwarted his efforts. Hannah lay on the road, her body badly burned, repeatedly begging for someone to save her children. At that moment, no one grasped the full extent of the tragedy. Hannah's body was severely burned, with over 97% of her skin damaged, except for her feet. Despite her excruciating pain, Hannah's thoughts were consumed by her children, who were now left vulnerable and unprotected. Hannah's badly burned body left police doubting her survival chances. Yet she refused to give up. With fierce determination, she provided a crucial testimony. Police officer Angus Cook carefully recorded every word Hannah spoke as she struggled to recount the events leading up to her tragic situation. With great difficulty, Hannah managed to name her ex-husband, Rowan Baxter, as the person responsible for her ordeal and provided a detailed account of what had happened. As Hannah's voice grew weaker and her body frail, Officer Angus remained by her side, offering words of encouragement and praise for her bravery. He reassured her that she had already done enough and that everything would be okay. Hannah was on the brink of death, yet she didn't fully grasp the horror unfolding around her. When questioned about whether Rowan had threatened her earlier, she replied that he hadn't. As doctors approached to alleviate her suffering, she lost the ability to speak. Meanwhile, Rowan Baxter's behavior was erratic. Despite suffering severe burns covering 80% of his body, he managed to exit the car unassisted. Rowan sat on the road, staring at the burning vehicle. After a brief moment, he inexplicably climbed back into the car, which was engulfed in flames. A witness, putting their own life at risk, attempted to extinguish the fire at the back of the car. It was then that Rowan retrieved a knife from the vehicle and began to chase people away, preventing them from putting out the flames. The children, trapped in the burning car, had little chance of survival. Nevertheless, bystanders refused to give up their efforts to save them. Rowan refused to let anyone approach the car, claimed them to a horrific death. In a final, selfish act, he stabbed himself with the knife. Despite her own life-threatening injuries, her primary concern was for the health of her children and her desire to reveal the truth. Tragically, Hannah passed away in the hospital on the same day at the young age of 31. Hannah was a victim of severe domestic violence, which also affected her children. She fought tirelessly to protect her family from their abuser, but sadly, her efforts were ultimately unsuccessful. Throughout her daily struggles, Hannah showed immense courage, standing up for her loved ones despite the numerous challenges she faced. For days later, a massive gathering took place to pay tribute to Hannah and her children. A lasting memorial, Hannah's house, was also created in Camp Hill, where a tree planting ceremony was held in her honor, accompanied by a plaque that tells the story of her life. Harold Sasko, better known as Hal, lived in Kansas City. He was born on September 11, 1961, in Dottsville, Florida, and was one of 12 children in the family. His siblings described Harold as a person who was ready to take responsibility in almost any situation. He often helped his brothers and sisters with household chores and was generally very organized. So it was not surprising that after graduating from college, Hal opened his own pizzeria. And just 2 years later, he expanded his business by starting a second restaurant. This led to his move to Lawrence in late 1990 with his then-wife Anna and their 3-year-old daughter Mendez. There, not far away in the city of Topeka, opened a third restaurant. Harold became dependent on his business, and his hard work and lifestyle focused solely on work did not suit his wife. After all, Hal was not only a business owner, but also a husband and father, so his wife and child deserved his attention. Eventually, this led to a serious rift between the couple, and when his wife could no longer endure the lonely life, they decided to divorce. Hal was considered a church parishioner, and he was proud of being not only a man of God, but also a respected member of the community. Those around him knew him as a kind, caring, and extremely organized manager. So it came as a real shock to the community when on January 17, 2014, their so-called good and caring manager suddenly disappeared. Chapter 2: Harold's disappearance. The day began like any other Friday. The weekend was just around the corner, and many people went to work to carry out their daily duties. Of course, this day was no exception for the pizzeria employees. The problem was that when they arrived at work, they found themselves in a quiet and empty restaurant. Usually, Hal was there to unlock the kitchen, but this time he was nowhere to be seen. Even stranger was the fact that it had been several days since anyone had heard from him. Concerned about his well-being, the employees called the police and demanded a welfare check at his home on West 26th Street. Later that day, a police officer was sent to his residence. When he knocked on the front door, he was met with silence. When he knocked on the front window of the house, he also received no response. The officer then looked inside to see if anyone was home, and it was at that moment that he saw the figure of a man lying face down on the floor. Calling for backup, law enforcement officials burst into the house. It was confirmed that the man on the floor was Hal, and moreover, he was lying in a pool of his own blood. It immediately became apparent that he was already geek, and judging by the condition of his body, he had been dead for several days. Moreover, it was not an accident. His hands were tied behind his back with zip ties, which were used to keep him under control. Hal's legs were also tied, but the most horrifying detail was that his throat was cut so deeply that the moaning side was shattered. With such a serious and brutal wound, he had no chance of survival. The officers were faced with an extremely gruesome scene. To top it all off, the police found several empty bottles at the other end of the room, as well as a phone and laptop that did not belong to Hal. They also noticed the absence of Hal's car in the driveway. But the strangest piece of evidence left at the crime scene was the word freedom sloppily written on the wall in Hal's blood. Chapter 3: The Investigation. The sudden influx of officers in the area undoubtedly drew increased attention from curious neighbors. The police decided to use this to their advantage and began asking more questions. That's how they learned that Harold was not living alone. His neighbors claimed that he was living with a girl he called his stepdaughter. This information turned out to be very important for the officers. Now they knew that there was a person who not only knew Harold well and was in constant contact with him, but was also present at the crime scene. Eventually, it was established that the so-called stepdaughter was 18-year-old Sarah Gonzalez McLean, who had been living with him for the last 2 years of his life. However, a problem arose. Sarah was nowhere to be found. This, of course, greatly concerned the officers. Finding Sarah became a top priority for law enforcement, as they had no idea what exactly had happened to her. She could have been abducted, become a victim, a witness, a suspect, or perhaps none of the above. In any case, it was now absolutely necessary to find her. Family members and friends were informed about this horrific crime. And 3 weeks later, on February 8th, a funeral was planned in memory of the lost community member. The public was urged to contact Douglas County forensic investigators and provide any information about Sarah's whereabouts. A reward of $1,000 was announced for any useful information. Chapter 4: Sarah's background. Sarah Gonzalez McLean was born on July 9, 1994 in Topeka, Kansas. She grew up in a loving family of 5. She had a brother and a sister. Throughout her childhood, Sarah was known as a shy but kind child. Since she was homeschooled for many years, she had few friends outside her neighborhood. However, this does not mean that she had a bad upbringing. Her parents were wonderful people, and she was always close to her sister. Unfortunately, when Sarah was a teenager, her parents eventually decided to divorce, which significantly affected her at such a vulnerable age. After her parents' divorce, her childhood and adolescence unfortunately only worsened. Sarah was quite naive, having been sheltered from the outside world by her parents. And unfortunately, people who are ready to take advantage of such a situation are always around. After her parents' divorce, Sarah experienced inappropriate behavior from a neighbor, and unfortunately, he eventually abused her. This event greatly influenced Sarah's character and behavior. She began to act completely differently than before. Much to her mother's dismay, Sarah began sneaking out of the house at night and hanging out with the wrong crowd. Even worse, this led to her frequent use of illicit substances and alcohol to drown out her suffering. It seemed that after her parents' divorce, Sarah no longer wanted to stay in her family home. That's when the pizzeria hired her. At first, he seemed like an ordinary kind manager, but there were rumors among the staff that he was not quite what he appeared to be. For example, Hal told all the restaurant managers that they could only hire young, attractive women. Chapter 5: Sarah's work at the pizzeria. While working at the pizzeria, Sarah would wake up, go to work, spend time there, and eventually return home to her family. She often spent nights drinking before returning home. According to some reports, she was only sober at work, if you could call it that. Despite the fact that she often came in drunk and nearly got fired several times over those few months, she somehow managed to keep her job. That's because Hal seemed to feel sorry for her. He knew that she was vulnerable and needed extra support. She tragically experienced another traumatic event. One such evening, another man attacked her, and to top it all off, the scumbag even burned her with cigarettes. After that, Sarah's already fragile mental health completely crumbled. She stopped going to work, lost friends, and sank into a very dark state. And then, she attempted to take her own life. Fortunately, Sarah's family found her in time to call an ambulance. She fully recovered, but it was only after the girl spent 5 months in the hospital. The nicest thing was that after being discharged from the hospital, Sarah received support from loved ones and friends. But one of these messages of support stood out in particular. It was from her former boss, Hal. After her tragic ordeal, Hal offered to become her personal life coach or even a kind of guardian. He could pick her up, take her somewhere to eat, and even let her express everything that was on her mind. Since there was no one else to turn to, Sarah eventually enlisted his support. It was during one of these walks that she told him her entire story, including her tragic encounters with other men, drinking, and everything else. Now Hal knew that she wanted to leave her family home, and upon learning about the traumas she had experienced, he suggested that she live with him in his own house. It all seemed a bit dubious. The problem was that Sarah was vulnerable, lost, and hurt. Hal's offer gave her a way out of it all. Chapter 6: Sarah's life with Hal. After moving in with Hal, everything seemed to stabilize for a short time. She found a new job far away from the pizzeria, took great care of her. Her dog moved in with her, and she even considered college. But Sarah's mother was unhappy with the whole situation. She found Hal quite strange, and the whole story seemed very suspicious to her. Every time she tried to talk to Sarah about it, it always ended in a big fight, which of course further alienated her daughter. Michelle didn't believe that Hal's intentions were always as innocent as he made them out to be. Even worse, she believed that her daughter was most likely too naive and prone to illusions to realize it. After the divorce, Sarah's father broke off all contact, and now she was trying to fill the void that had formed. To make the situation even more eerie, eventually asked Sarah to call him Gad, and then he told all the neighbors that she was his stepdaughter. It's not surprising that Sarah's colleagues eventually fob out about all this and inquired about her relationship with Hal. Now, when asked about it, Sarah insisted that he was just her friend and nothing more. But from an outsider's perspective, it was strange that a 50-year-old man brought him attractive but troubled 18-year-old girl into his home, and perhaps her peers suspected something. As soon as Sarah settled into the house and began to feel more comfortable, Hal started setting his own boundaries and attitudes towards life, especially when she turned 18. This change was quite alarming. Hal began buying her illegal drugs and alcohol, joking about them dating, and even brought up the topic of a sexual relationship with Sarah. In addition to these changes, he openly kept track of everything he bought for her, including alcohol, illegal drugs, cosmetics, and rent. He wanted her to feel indebted to him, and he also told her that she would only be able to leave once she paid him back. In fact, she felt so trapped that after she turned 18, she gave in to his advances, and her relationship with the man she once called Dad now became sexual. This diabolical situation lasted for a whole 10 months, and according to Sarah, they had sex several times a week. The only way she could cope was to drink and use illegal substances until she no longer felt involved in the situation. This, of course, further increased her debt to the man who was now using her body. On top of everything, Hal berated Sarah just as often as he complimented her. For example, he criticized her nose and then offered to pay for plastic surgery, which she, unsure of herself, eventually agreed to. It was clear that Hal treated her as his personal property, rather than as another human being with feelings. He also paid for her gum implantation, and his next goal was to buy her breast implants. Both of these surgeries cost $16,000, which of course was added to the bill, and she had to pay him back when she could afford it. She found herself trapped with no way out. In addition to this, Hal also threatened Sarah, telling her that he had connections if she ever tried to escape. From that moment on, her mental health deteriorated even further. In response, she was given antidepressants to cope with the situation, for which she would eventually have to pay again. Chapter 7. Sarah kills Hal. Trapped by the mental trauma of abuse and depression, Sarah's mind became clouded. She repeatedly found herself on the brink, and now, after supposedly finding someone she could rely on, he too turned out to be an abuser. Sarah had absolutely had enough, and she began to act in a way that eventually turned the victim into a killer. After visiting a pet store, she bought a rabbit and signed a waiver before taking it home. That same evening, one of Hal's pizzeria managers was visiting the house for dinner and drinks. The manager was shocked when he opened the refrigerator and saw a rabbit carcass instead of beer. Sarah not only admitted that she was responsible for killing the pet rabbit, but also stated that it was not the first animal she had killed. Completely bewildered by the situation, the manager politely stayed for dinner, but then went home. This was a huge red flag, and an indication of what Sarah was potentially capable of. Unfortunately, this sign was ignored. The main question remained whether Sarah was truly capable of killing a person. Although Sarah was initially considered missing, it was soon established that she was actually the prime suspect. Unfortunately, the detectives were not mistaken in their assumptions. They suspected that she had packed all her belongings, taken the dog, stolen Harold's car, and fled to Texas. However, along the way, she changed her plans and headed to Florida. It was warmer there, and the idea of admiring the ocean view seemed pleasant. Given this newly received information, she was officially declared a wanted person. Sarah was not only wanted on suspicion of murdering Hal, but also as mentally unwell and possibly dangerous to others. Her name was on the lips of many officers across the country, and this continued for 11 days. On January 25, 2014, after being on the run for just over a week and a half, Sarah McLean was finally found and arrested in Everglades National Park. Not surprisingly, the police officer found her in Hal's stolen car, sleeping next to a loaded gun. They also found $2,400 in cash, 2 more guns, an axe, and a couple of knives, one of which was stained with Harold's blood. Chapter 8. Sarah's trial. A few hours after her arrest, a 3-hour interrogation began, during which Sarah confessed to killing the man. According to her version of events, the story unfolded as follows. On January 14, 2014, Harold returned home after a long day at work. The sound system had recently broken down, and he decided to devote the evening to repairing it. He asked Sarah to bring him a beer, and then another and another. After a few hours, fatigue took its toll and Hal suddenly passed out on the floor. He didn't even suspect that Sarah had actually put a large amount of sleeping pills in one of his last bottles. By that point, she had already decided Hal had to die. She tied him up with zip ties, took a hunting knife, and then a few minutes later slit his throat. Shortly after that, Harold died in his sleep. Sarah then took a shower, listening to her favorite music, and washed all the blood off herself. After that, she called work to say that she would be out for a few days because, unfortunately, a relative had passed away. She then packed her things, including a photo of her sister, took the dog, and disappeared into the night in her stolen car. To avoid being found, she left her cell phone and laptop at home. During the interrogation, Sarah openly shared her motives. She was locked in the house and in debt to a man who clearly wanted to possess her. She became his target, was abused, and then turned into his property. Anger clouded her thirst for revenge, and regardless of the consequences, revenge was exactly what she wanted. Sarah also expressed a strong desire to resort to violence. She admitted to killing rabbits out of curiosity. She also claimed that for 2 years, she had thoughts of violence and noticed that they were progressing. Obviously, Sarah's confession put her in a very difficult position. She not only confessed to killing Hal, but also to enduring violence. Given these horrific facts, it became absolutely clear that she would face trial. However, it was also clear that Sarah was undoubtedly mentally unwell. So first and foremost, she would have to undergo a psychological examination. In addition to her recently developed penchant for violence, she also claimed to have memory lapses, and felt that she was an observer in her own mind. Not surprisingly, Sarah was eventually diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. In Sarah's mind, she was not just Sarah. She was also Vanessa, Alice, Neela, and the nameless one. Alice was the weepy and vulnerable side of Sarah, while Vanessa was the strong, militant fighter inside her. Neela was feminine, polite, and liked to please people. But of course, the saddest version of them was the nameless one, who took on all the consequences of the trauma and depression. Chapter 9. Sarah's sentence. When it came to Sarah's trial, her dissociative identity disorder was the main line of defense. She claimed that a girl named Alice wanted to take her own life, but the other personalities convinced her not to. After careful discussion among themselves, they decided that the only way out was to kill Hal. In a clearer and healthier world, Sarah's defense team argued that she was in a state of clinical dissociation when she committed her crime. The abuse Sarah endured living with Harold is alarming. However, it was ultimately deemed irrelevant as everything was consensual. From an investigative point of view, this was not compelling evidence. The defense itself also could not be persuasive, as the murder was clearly intentional. Unfortunately for Sarah, although her mental disorder was recognized as genuine, her defense failed to convince the judges, and she was ultimately found guilty of murdering Harold Sasko. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 50 years. This greatly shocked both Sarah and her family. It became apparent that the abuse she had endured throughout her life and her mental state at the time of the murder were not taken into account when sentencing her, which means that her punishment was much harsher than she deserved. Sarah filed an appeal on the grounds that the abuse she suffered should have been considered during the trial. Unfortunately, by that time, more evidence of Harold's horrible behavior had been uncovered. After analyzing his computers, detectives found that they were literally riddled with illegal pornography. In addition, another woman, whose name remains unknown, claimed that Hal had hit on both of her daughters. Given all this new evidence, Sarah's appeal resulted in a 50% reduction in her sentence to 25 years. To this day, she still remains behind bars. And that's because although the judge concluded that Hal did indeed abuse his control over Sarah, it doesn't negate the fact that she still committed premeditated murder. Chapter 10. Conclusions. Sarah was initially a victim. Harold was a cruel manipulator of young women and did a very good job of deceiving many people in his community. However, some still remember him as an extremely generous person. Harold also had good sides. For example, he was known to have helped many employees get out of financial crisis, and whenever someone needed advice, he was always ready to help. Harold's family does not deny his shameful actions, but they testify to his positive character. He clearly needed help and did wrong, but he never deserved to die. Although Sarah's family agrees that she must be punished for her crimes, they also believe that the sentence was too harsh for someone trying to escape her abuser. Harold was undoubtedly a favorite of many people, but at the same time, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing. This story is an example of how life circumstances, trauma, and a lack of proper support can lead to tragic consequences. Sarah became a victim of abuse by someone she trusted, and it caused irreparable damage to her mental health. However, this does not justify her actions, the deliberate murder of another human being. This story also demonstrates how important it is to be attentive to those around us and to be able to recognize warning signs. Perhaps if someone had intervened earlier, the tragedy could have been avoided. At the same time, this story raises questions about the fairness of the justice system. Was Sarah's punishment adequate, given all the circumstances? Was her mental state and the trauma she suffered sufficiently taken into account? These questions remain open for discussion. Ultimately, this story serves as a reminder that a completely different personality can be hiding behind a person's appearance. Harold, who many considered kind and generous, actually turned out to be a manipulator and a predator. This story prompts us to be careful in our judgments of others. On June 5, 2000, at 1 p.m., Sharon Ancotts, a 54-year-old woman, was shot and killed at the John Butler Dry Cleaners on Easley Bridge Road. Additionally, there were no arrests made for an extended period of time, which caused complete panic in the neighborhood. The culprit remained unidentified for more than 20 years, but the investigation was revived in 2022 by a reconstituted cold case unit. A team of meticulous investigators and forensic specialists worked to unearth the long-hidden truth. They carefully re-interviewed both new and old witnesses and assessed forensic data. After 20 years, the murderer was finally apprehended. How did that fateful night's events transpire? Why did the investigators decide to reopen this long-closed case in the eyes of the justice system? Greenville County, South Carolina is a bustling and populous area. More people live there than in any other county in the state. The county seat, where important decisions are made, is located in Greenville. What distinguishes Greenville County is its emphasis on education. Greenville County is the largest school district in South Carolina. Students learn, develop, and make plans for the future here. Greenville County is more than just choices in schools. Another attraction is the natural beauty, which includes peaceful landscapes and undulating hills. This place has a very welcoming community. Tragedies, though, can happen even in this peaceful paradise. The unsolved case of Sharon Ancotts, which persisted for almost 20 years, left a lasting impression on the town. The 19th of October, 1945 saw the birth of Sharon Ancotts, daughter of Leslie Franklin Kellogg and Leona Rosetta Skester Prince. Sharon developed into a strong, driven adult. She brought warmth and a work ethic that was characteristic of the Midwest. Having grown up in northern Michigan, alongside her sisters, Gloria Hopkins, Sandra Sanders, and Leslie Kellogg, Sharon Ancotts grew up in Michigan. She also grew up alongside her brothers, Ivan Tucker and Marjorie Perrin Richard Kellogg. She inherited kindness and a desire to make the world a better place from her early years. At exactly 21 years old, on July 12, 1966, she gave birth to a son named Frank. Public access to her and her son's relationship is currently restricted. Sharon relocated to Greenville, South Carolina in her mid-40s, where she established herself and had additional children. She also had two other sons, Walter and Michael, and a daughter, Christina. Was employed at the John Butler Dry Cleaners on Easley Bridge Road, which would subsequently serve as the scene of a tragic incident. Locals knew the small dry cleaners on Easley Bridge Road. Neighbors chatted while dropping off or picking up their laundry at this communal hub. 54 years old Sharon Ancotts, the woman in charge of this dry cleaning establishment, was well known for her diligence and congenial demeanor. She was a beloved member of the Greenville community, having grown up in Michigan. Sadly, on June 5, 2000, was shot and killed during a robbery at her dry cleaning. Greenville County was forever altered by this tragedy. The killer of Sharon remained a mystery for more than 20 years. The quiet upstate town of Greenville, South Carolina, was horrified to learn of Sharon's horrific murder. On June 5, 2000, during the late summer twilight, dry cleaners were getting ready to close as the sun was setting, creating long shadows on the empty streets. Sharon arranged the counter as usual. She had no idea it would get dark on this typical evening. Among the friends and regulars that evening was an unexpected presence. A certain 44-year-old man had visited the dry cleaners. He occasionally performed strange tasks around the store, such as emptying the trash. His intentions on this fateful evening were, however, not pure. This man was going to rob the dry cleaners. He watched the company's activities in silence, waiting for the ideal moment to strike. With every task he completed in the days preceding the crime, he got closer to his malevolent objective. On the evening of June 5, 2000, he suddenly made contact with Sharon with malicious intent. Sharon stood up for herself and her dry cleaning company during a terrible ordeal. There was a gunshot at the end of the conflict that reverberated throughout the community for years. That fateful night, silence was shattered by a gunshot. The beautiful Sharon Anschutz was killed by a senseless act of violence. Her life of kindness and hard work came to an abrupt end when she was shot in the back. As the gunshot faded, the gravity of the situation hit home. Once the killer realized how serious his act was, he left shock, terror, and sadness in his wake. Tragically killed in a place where she had brought so much joy, Sharon lay behind the counter in the pool of her own blood. The neighborhood was shocked by the tragedy that night. At 1:30 p.m., a customer discovered her dead and called 911. The dry cleaners, which was once a cozy and welcoming place, turned into a somber reminder of the darkness that can be found anywhere. Sharon's work ethic and steadfastness were deeply mourned by her colleagues, friends, and family. While the murderer was at large, local authorities began a vigorous investigation. They wished to stop such a horrible act from occurring in their neighborhood, send Sharon's assailant to prison, and provide closure to her bereaved family. Despite their best efforts, the murder investigation into Sharon Anschutz stalled. In the dark, the killer had eluded capture. Following the disaster at John Butler Dry Cleaners in June 2000, Greenville County was in disbelief. Following the murder of the community's beloved Sharon Anschutz, justice had to be served. The early investigation into this horrific murder demonstrated the resolve of law enforcement, as well as the community's optimistic quest for answers. When first responders arrived, the investigation started. The offender was the subject of an instant manhunt by the Greenville County Sheriff's Office. A thorough search of the crime scene was conducted for evidence, and witnesses who lived nearby were questioned. It was clear from the beginning that solving this case would require unwavering perseverance. One of the detective's biggest problems early on in the case was the absence of a suspect. With minimal evidence, Sharon was killed in the shadows. Still, the investigation was shaped by the possibility of a robbery. According to early witness accounts, the intruder intended to loot the dry cleaners. It seemed as though Sharon Anschutz had been violently robbed while attempting to defend her business. As investigators tried to find the person responsible for this horrific act of violence, this information further complicated the case. It was necessary to gather and analyze copious amounts of evidence for the initial inquiry. Every square inch of the crime scene was examined in search of hints about the perpetrator. Investigators looked for physical evidence that might provide a breakthrough, such as DNA and fingerprints. Questions were asked of witnesses at the dry cleaners. Their crucial testimony provided important details about the pre- and post-crime activities. They described the events of that night, including Sharon Anschutz's terrifying encounter with her attacker. Sharon Anschutz, who touched many lives, was mourned in Greenville County while law enforcement conducted an investigation. Her co-workers, friends, and family were in mourning. The community stood by Sharon's family during the investigation and promised to pursue justice. The outcome of the case depended on their determination. As leads dwindled and witnesses grew more elusive, the case stagnated. Sharon's loved ones remembered her, but her killer remained a mystery. The case was eventually filed under cold case. Leads dried up, witnesses moved on, and the trail of the criminal became more bleak every day. The prolonged investigation caused suffering for Sharon's friends, family, and community. This terrible crime's perpetrator was unknown for more than 20 years. Victim Sharon Anschutz continues to exist. She was a representation of strength and hope. It was hope that justice would triumph and the truth would come to light. For more than 20 years, Greenville County, South Carolina was plagued by her cold case. A renewed quest for justice in the summer of 2022 brought this long-dormant investigation back to life. The tipping point was the new cold case unit of the Greenville County Sheriff's Office, which debuted in the summer of 2022. Sheriff Lewis established a specialized unit in 2020 to look into cases that remain unsolved, such as the Sharon Anschutz cold case. His objectives were to resurrect past investigations, assess the evidence, speak with witnesses again, and employ fresh techniques. The pursuit of justice for victims of unsolved crimes was revitalized by this cold case unit. The community was assured that every case would be taken seriously, and that no effort would be spared. The Sharon Anschutz cold case reinvestigation started by detectives reaching out to witnesses of the June 2000 incident at the dry cleaners in an attempt to gather information. They confronted witnesses whose memories had faded. Regardless, reconstructing the crime and the attacker's actions required careful consideration of their testimonies. These extra interviews shed light on the events of that evening. The murderer's meeting of Sharon Anschutz was revealed by witnesses. Their memories, though fading, were essential to solving the mystery. Technology and forensic evidence were scarce early in the case, but over time, forensic science developed. This gave the reinvestigation team the opportunity to assess the evidence with state-of-the-art techniques. Forensic specialists meticulously examined crime scene material using modern methodologies in order to uncover new information. Ballistic testing and DNA fingerprinting were repeated. Although exhausting, it resulted in a breakthrough. Old clues were re-examined and new leads surfaced as the investigation went on. Witnesses who were interviewed again disclosed the attacker's goals. The horrifying events that transpired at the dry cleaners were re-examined and determined to be an attempted robbery gone wrong. Detectives learned more about the crime as a result of this. Investigators also looked into the connections of Roger Keith Hudgens, the key suspect who died in 2008. Hudgens was a neighbor of the dry cleaners. Witness accounts and his connections within the establishment shed light on the murderer's activities. The breakthrough in the Sharon Anschutz cold case was the result of diligent work, fresh interviews, and advanced forensic analysis. Investigators determined that Sharon Anschutz was killed by 44-year-old Roger Keith Hudgens at the beginning of January 2023. Testimonies from witnesses and forensic evidence shed light on that fatal evening. Horrible things happened as a result of Hudgens' plan to rob the dry cleaners. In the Sharon Anschutz cold case, no one was taken into custody despite this effort. Hudgens is the culprit, the investigators concluded, but he passed away in 2008. It provided closure to the victim's family and addressed inquiries from the community. The crime and its aftermath will always be associated with Hudgens, even though he was never charged with it. Even though no one was arrested, Greenville County was prepared for the Sharon Anschutz cold case trial after 20 years of uncertainty. Justice had produced findings that would go to trial. Roger Keith Hudgens, the main suspect, went on trial even in death. His actions on that fateful day in June 2000 were gaining legal attention, even after he passed away in 2008. The personnel at the dry cleaners knew Hudgens, a local from Sharon Anschutz's tragic robbery. Witness accounts and forensic evidence would be used by the prosecution to discredit Hudgens. As the trial started, the courtroom was filled with anticipation. The prosecution meticulously gathered testimony from witnesses about that terrible night. They gave a detailed account of Hudgens and Sharon Anschutz's meeting prior to the crime. The forensic evidence that was re-examined was crucial to the case. Experts in ballistics attested that Hudgens' weapon was used in the killing. His DNA was found at the crime scene, which provided strong evidence in his criminal case. To undermine the prosecution, the defense made a move. They questioned witness accounts, saying that memories had become hazy with time. To cast doubt, they also questioned the chain of custody for the evidence. Weeks of court cases, talks, and introspection led up to the moment of truth. The jury unanimously found Roger Keith Hudgens guilty of killing Sharon Anschutz. The verdict that provided closure to Sharon's family and confirmed the community's and law enforcement's commitment to justice reverberated throughout the courtroom. Despite his passing, Hudgens will always be associated with the senseless crime that left the town scarred. Roger Keith Hudgens was found guilty and his sentencing commenced. A sentence that was appropriate for the crime was what the prosecution sought. The defense, on the other hand, asked for mercy, pointing to Hudgens' innocence and lack of criminal history. The trial came to an end when Hudgens was found guilty of the tragedy that occurred that evening. Some criminals leave an indelible mark on the people they wronged. Roger Keith Hudgens' life was connected to Greenville County's most horrifying incident in the Sharon Anschutz cold case. Roger Keith Hudgens was familiar with Greenville County. Hudgens' birth date is September 13th, 1955. He had a good local reputation. He was well known for frequenting the dry cleaners where the old case started. Hudgens performed strange jobs at the dry cleaners over the years. Every now and then, he removed the trash. On February 17, 2008, Roger Keith Hudgens passed away. His violent deed, which dates back years, left a legacy. He passed away due to medical issues. Any legal action against him was terminated by his death because he would never face justice. His name was still connected to the unsolved case of Sharon Anschutz. Even though he would never be held responsible, justice would always be associated with him and his deeds. The case of Christina and Thompson Harris. Christina and Thompson and Jason Thomas Harris, both 40, had been married for 11 years by 2014. They got married in 2003 after dating for about 5 years. In 2009, Christina and Jason welcomed their first child, which brought significant changes to their lives. Despite the daily challenges and responsibilities, they were happy to be parents. Christina took care of the house and the children while Jason worked at a plastics factory. As the children grew up, Christina was able to contribute financially to the family by working. However, in May 2014, she had to take maternity leave because she was expecting their second child in a few weeks. On September 29, 2014, Jason chatted with Christina while at work. Christina was suffering from a cold. She had a bad cough and was not sleeping well, but she reassured her husband that she was fine. A few hours later, Jason called his wife at home but received no response, which worried him. Unable to reach Christina, Jason asked a neighbor to check on her. He explained that Christina was sick and not answering the phone. The neighbor knocked on the front door but got no answer, so she called Christina's name. Receiving no response, she decided to try the door, found it unlocked, and entered the house. When she entered the bedroom, she found Christina lying on the bed and could not wake her. The neighbor called 911 and ran out of the house to call another neighbor, a nurse. The nurse checked Christina's pulse and confirmed that she had died. Thus, on September 29, 2014, for months after the birth of her second child, Christina was found dead at home. When the police arrived, Jason Harris was present. He told the police and paramedics that his wife had been sick but was alive when he left for work that morning. 2 days later, the medical examiner ruled that Christina died from an overdose of a controlled substance, a finding that shocked her family and friends. Most people who knew Christina, a mother of 2, including a newborn, believed that she had never used drugs. Christina's mother, Kathy, told police that her daughter was fine when she saw her the day before she died. Police were therefore skeptical of Jason Harris's claim that his wife had a cold. According to Kathy, Christina said her marriage to Jason was complicated. Jason was unhappy with the marriage but did not want a divorce because of concerns about child support and custody. Neighbors who discovered Christina's body also provided additional information to the police. Jason reportedly told them that the night before Christina died, he had prepared cereal with milk for her. Then Christina passed out and dropped the plate. Police realized that Christina's family and friends had a hard time accepting that she might be involved in drugs. Instead, police suspected that Jason Harris was involved in Christina's death. Christina's mother and sisters insisted that police test her breast milk. According to Kathy, the police ignored the request for 48 hours. However, thanks to the family's persistence, the police finally agreed to investigate. As a result, breast milk was used as evidence for the first time in Michigan history. As confirmed by Christina's family and friends, all drug tests at her workplace and at the hospital where she gave birth to her second child were negative. Her second child was only 4 months old when Christina died. Christina was breastfeeding, and Kathy confirmed that Christina was very careful about what she put into her body because she didn't want to affect her child. Christina often pumped breast milk while at work and stored it in the freezer. Some of the breast milk was left at Kathy's mother's house. They tested 3 bags of breast milk for possible drug residue. These bags were labeled with the date they were put in the freezer so Christina knew which bag to thaw first. Experts tested all the samples, including the ones frozen just before Christina died, and found no signs of drugs. This proves that Christina did not use the substance that killed her. Jason Harris's sister was the only one who suggested that Christina had used drugs, prompting investigators to focus more on Jason and treat Christina's death as a homicide. The investigation was slow, and it is unclear what would have happened if Christina's family had not been actively involved in the search for the truth. Kathy repeatedly reminded Davison police about her daughter's case in August 2016, nearly 2 years after Christina's death. Not seeing the enthusiasm and desire to solve her daughter's case in Davison, Kathy asked Davison police to turn the case over to the Michigan State Police, which had new investigators. From there, the story began to unravel. Police gathered a lot of information about Jason Harris, including how he acted before and after his wife's death. Jason had been having affairs with other women. Christina knew about this and confided in her family and co-workers that Jason had been texting other people while she was giving birth to their youngest child. Christina once told a co-worker that if she died, Jason would be the cause. When asked if she was serious, she said yes. Jason told his co-worker that he suspected the second child was not his biological child. He also complained that after the birth, Christina became depressed, often stayed in bed and did not go to work. Jason often complained about Christina nagging him. A coworker of Jason recalled that Jason may have told him that he wanted Christina dead. He described the relationship between Jason and Christina as toxic and recalled that they argued frequently. One of the most surprising and shocking things about this case is that Jason Harris did not hesitate to let everyone know that he wanted to get rid of his wife. He tried to do so, but unfortunately, no one paid attention to his words and actions before Christina died. Jason bought poison twice and mixed it into her drink. Both times, Christina felt that the taste was unusual and did not drink it. Jason then asked a coworker to find him a poison that would not change the taste or smell of drinks or food. Jason said he wanted to knock Christina unconscious so she would not feel anything. When he shared with the coworker that Christina would not drink water because it tasted strange, the coworker refused to talk to him further. The coworker testified that Jason had talked about wanting Christina to stop nagging and that the coworker thought Jason was joking. Jason also told a coworker that he had hired someone to kill Christina, but the person was arrested for another reason before the murder. Jason therefore offered the coworker $10,000 from Christina's $100,000 life insurance policy to kill her. The coworker refused the offer, thinking that Jason was just venting his anger by talking about his wife and making inappropriate jokes. According to the colleague, he recalled a conversation with Jason in which Jason said, "I'm bored with her. I'm going to dump her." The police then decided to question the neighbor who discovered Christina's body. The neighbor testified that she saw Christina's family truck in the driveway, but Christina did not come to the door. She entered the house and found Christina lying in bed, unresponsive. The neighbor asked Jason if she should try to wake her up. He replied that Christina must have fallen asleep and that he would come home. The neighbor went back inside and removed the covers around Christina because she felt cold and had foam coming from her mouth and nose. The neighbor called 911 and another neighbor who was a registered nurse. The neighbor, who was a registered nurse, testified that Christina was cold, stiff, had no pulse, and had white foam coming from her mouth. She did not attempt to resuscitate Christina because she believed she was already dead. Jason told the police that he asked a neighbor to check on Christina and that he had to rush home because Christina was unresponsive. However, witnesses said Jason did not appear anxious or in a hurry. What raised suspicions about Jason was that morning he called Christina's supervisor at work. He told her that Christina had died the night before and that he wanted to inquire about the $100,000 death benefit from Christina's life insurance policy through work. Additionally, one of the women, Jason, had an intimate relationship with told investigators that Jason had contacted her on the day of Christina's death and said that his wife had died from an overdose of a controlled substance. This suggests that he knew what caused Christina's death even before the medical examiner's report. That evening, the neighbor he had asked to check on Christina saw him in his driveway. She said that Jason told her that Christina was not the angel her parents thought she was, and that their child would soon learn all the good and bad things about Christina. He said that Christina dropped her bowl of cereal, and he told her to go to bed. Jason also told a neighbor that his wife tossed and turned during the night, and that he heard her coughing before he left for work. Jason wondered if that was her last breath. Jason told a police officer that Christina was coughing a lot when he left the house. He also told the police that Christina fell asleep eating cereal the night before she died. Finally, Jason told Christina's mother, Kathy, that before she died, Christina complained that her water tasted like chemicals. One of the main motives in this case is believed to be insurance money. Within a week of Christina's death, Jason and his mother went to Christina's workplace to inquire about the life insurance money. Additionally, Jason received a $20,000 death benefit from a life insurance policy issued by his company shortly after Christina's death. One of Jason's lovers moved in with Jason and his children. Christina's mother believed that Jason's lover moved in with him after Christina's funeral. However, Jason's neighbor testified that the lover had even moved into Jason's home before Christina's funeral. The neighbor added that Jason's adult children from a previous marriage moved into the home within days of Christina's death. Police also discovered that Jason Harris purchased a plane ticket to Rhode Island 9 days after Christina's death to visit a woman with whom he had exchanged more than 5,800 text messages. County Medical Examiner Dr. Brian Hunter submitted post-mortem blood and urine samples for laboratory testing. Dr. Hunter determined that the test results were consistent with Christina being poisoned by a lethal substance. Initially, Dr. Hunter determined that her death was an accident because there were no injection marks on Christina's body, and investigators did not find any powder residue or rolling papers next to the bed where Christina died. In 2016, the Michigan State Police took over the investigation into Christina's death. In 2019, after Christina's family disputed Christina's cause of death, Dr. Hunter later changed Christina's death certificate from an accident to a homicide. Police charged Jason with first-degree murder, solicitation of murder, and delivery of a controlled substance resulting in death. He was denied bail. Jason's attorney, Nicholas Robinson, said his client pleaded not guilty to the charges and wanted to fight them. When he was arrested, Jason had lost his job after testing positive for drugs. Kathy's efforts to ensure that law enforcement would punish the person responsible for her daughter's death were not overlooked. Gina's County Prosecutor David Layton said that a few years ago, he began receiving Facebook messages and emails from a Davidson woman who claimed her daughter had died and that her death was not an accident. "It can't be happening," the woman told the prosecutor. She was certain that someone had caused her daughter's death. Kathy's passionate pleas caught David Layton's attention, prompting authorities to re-examine the death of her daughter, Christina. "I will never forget what she wrote in an email, prosecutor. You are my last hope. This is our last chance to get justice for my daughter. Please help me," David Layton said. "At that moment, and as I spoke to her this morning, I was absolutely convinced that her daughter's death was not an accident. It was the result of foul play. It was Kathy's relentless efforts to seek justice for her daughter's death that led to this situation, and those efforts paid off." The trial began in 2020. The prosecution alleged that Jason put a controlled substance in his wife's cereal bowl to kill her. He then went to work as usual, waited a few hours, and asked a neighbor to check on Christina. According to the prosecution, Jason wanted someone else to discover his wife's body in order to reduce suspicion against him. The direct evidence against Jason was overwhelming. Jason had a motive for killing Christina. He was having an affair with another woman, suspected she was cheating on him, believed the second child was not his, and was tired of her nagging. Jason did not want a divorce because he did not want to pay child support or lose custody of her. Before her death, Jason told a coworker that he wanted Christina dead. On the morning of her death, Jason called her company to inquire about a $100,000 life insurance policy. And in that call, he said Christina had died the night before. The jury heard clear evidence that Jason not only wanted Christina dead, but that he had tried to hire someone to kill her. He planned to do this and knew where to buy illegal drugs. In fact, he had purchased them on multiple occasions to give to Christina. At trial, multiple witnesses testified that Christina did not use drugs recreationally. Christina was very careful about what she consumed because she was breastfeeding. Furthermore, tests showed that her frozen breast milk contained no harmful substances. To support the theory that Jason had poisoned Christina's food, the prosecution presented toxicology reports. For example, Dr. Judge argued that Christina's death could have been caused by ingestion of some kind of poison. The prosecution ruled out injection because no traces of injection or needles were found at the scene. Dr. Judge also testified that inhalation was unlikely because no rolled-up dollar bills or snorting paper were found at the scene. The court gave Jason Harris a chance to speak, but he did not apologize or show remorse. Instead, he insisted that he was innocent. The judge said the jury did not believe your lies, ultimately exposing him as a selfish and deceitful murderer. On November 17, 2021, the jury found Jason Harris, 47, guilty on all charges. 3 weeks later, the court sentenced him to life in prison without parole. He has appealed the verdict, however. After the trial, prosecutor David Layton expressed his condolences to Christina's family and friends, emphasizing that this was a tragic case. Layton went on to say, "While this case has many unique and media-driven details, the most important thing is the family's loss. I hope this verdict helps them find comfort in knowing that justice has been served." Jason requested a new trial on the grounds that his defense attorney did not do a good job. He introduced evidence in the form of his attorney's testimony, showing that his defense attorney failed to seek an independent expert opinion on the prosecution's evidence and failed to consult with an independent toxicologist. Jason's defense attorney explained this decision as part of a trial strategy because he had thoroughly questioned Dr. Hunter and was able to show the jury that Dr. Hunter had changed his opinion about the cause of death based on information from a related civil lawsuit. In February 2024, the Michigan Court of Appeals upheld Jason Harris's conviction. He remains in prison for life without the possibility of parole. The case of Vicky Glass. Vicky Glass was born on September 21, 1979 in Stockton-on-Tees, a small town in the northeast of England on the banks of the River Tees. She has an older sister named Claire, who is 1 year older. When Vicky was 6 years old, her parents, Deborah and Anthony, decided to divorce. Her mother, Deborah, later married another man named Colin Goodall, and Vicky had a half-sister named Cheryl and a brother named Thomas. Although her parents divorced, they continued to live in Stockton. Vicky developed a passion for music from an early age, becoming a big fan of Michael Jackson and the musical Cats. Between the ages of 13 and 18, she joined a local jazz band and often performed with her friends. After graduating from Blackstone High School, Vicky continued her studies at the academy and earned 5 college degrees. However, her life changed dramatically. At 18, Vicky fell in with a bad group of friends and began her drug addiction. Her illegal activities were mainly in the Cannon Park and Gresham areas of Middleborough, near her hometown. In 1999, Vicky became homeless and contracted severe pneumonia. During this difficult time, her friend introduced her to a man named Patch Claus. This man provided her with a temporary place to heal. For months, Vicky lived with Patch, who cared for her and provided her with medication. However, this support was not enough to help Vicky escape her addiction and unhealthy lifestyle. On September 23, 2000, a few days after her 21st birthday, Vicky left Patch's house with her friend for the last time. She had initially stayed at Cannon Park in Gresham. Vicky also worked as an escort on Set Road in Middleborough, and they drove to Main Road. Main Road was notorious for escorting and illegal activities. After staying there for a while, Vicky and her client left and hailed the Ring taxi. The taxi driver then took them to a man's house in Norton, only 3 blocks away from where they had left. Vicky stayed there once more before hailing another taxi to return to Middleborough. The taxi that picked her up was a white Vauxhall Vectra, registration number 790. At 4 a.m. on Sunday, September 24th, she got out at the intersection of Union Road and Ashwood Square, near a pub called The Colleague. From there, Vicky was only a 5-minute walk to Patch's residence, where she lived with the man. However, she did not return home. Patch became concerned when Vicky did not return and began calling, visiting friends and going to places she frequented. But there was no news of her. After 3 days, he contacted the police. And on September 27th, an investigation into Vicky's disappearance was launched. A week after Vicky went missing on October 5th, the local paper, the Northern Echo, published an article headlined "Missing Young Woman." In the article, Vicky was described as being about 5 feet 1 inch tall with blonde hair tied in a ponytail. She was wearing a white t-shirt, light gray trousers, and white trainers. The article also quoted a police officer as saying that Vicky was a known prostitute and frequented hot spots. Vicky's family refused to give up and were determined to find out who was behind the incident. In 2018, the police received additional funding to try to find a criminal. On Friday, November 3rd, a man was walking his dog in the village of Demi, 20 miles southwest of Middleborough. At 6 a.m., he walked past a ditch near the main road in the village and discovered the decomposing, unclothed body parts of a woman. He quickly called the police, who arrived and identified the victim as Vicky Glass, a 21-year-old woman who had gone missing. The cause of her death has not yet been determined. North Yorkshire and Cleveland police immediately began an investigation. A team of 40 police officers were sent to the scene to collect evidence and conduct forensic examinations. However, no traces were found at the scene, and the clothes Vicky was wearing when she went missing were not found. Detective Brian Dan, who is leading the investigation, has appealed to journalists to contact anyone who knew Vicky, spoke to her, and has any information that could help the investigation. As Demi was a popular tourist destination, police appealed to anyone who might have been in the area to contact. Police noted that the car that brought Vicky to the village may have stopped on the roadside outside the village before entering the village and asked people to be aware of the stop. On November 13, 2000, Vicky's mother Deborah addressed the press appealing for witnesses to her daughter's disappearance. Police placed a picture of Vicky in the pub where she was last reported missing, as well as in other areas of the city where sex workers were known to operate. By November 20th, police had interviewed nearly 500 people and received more than 150 statements. Those interviewed included former clients of Vicky and drivers who used the Cannon Park overnight car park where Vicky and other sex workers often worked. The police laid flowers on her grave where her body was found. They then appealed to the public for any information that might help them find the culprit. 2 men in Vicky's family tried to stay calm, appealing for the public's cooperation in the investigation. Meanwhile, Vicky's mother, Deborah, was extremely distraught and could not attend the ceremony. After questioning many people, the police found important information. They said that about 12 prostitutes may have information related to Vicky's disappearance. The police began a more thorough investigation. In March, the police began to closely monitor lorry drivers stopping at Cannon Park car park. Next, the police arrested a 39-year-old man from Grimsby, but he was released on bail and his identity is still kept secret from the public. On January 9, 2002, police arrested a 47-year-old man on suspicion of being involved in Vicky's case. 2 days after his arrest, on January 11th, the man's name was given as Eric Coates. He was a resident of South North Yorkshire and lived about 45 miles south of Middleborough. Eric regularly used the services of prostitutes and was a client of Vicky. This was the third time Eric had been questioned about Vicky's disappearance. Police searched his home where he lived with his parents. Police said Eric could not provide an alibi for his whereabouts on the day Vicky went missing, although he did mention that he may have been at his home because it was his father's birthday that evening. Eric Coates later gave an interview to the Northern Echo saying that, according to rumors, Vicky had been murdered over a drug debt and that he did not want anyone else to die like that. He also expressed hope that a criminal would be found. Police found no clear evidence and Eric was released without charge. In July 2002, Cleveland police announced their intention to question another suspect, John Taylor. John had been sentenced to life in prison for the kidnap and murder of 16-year-old Leanne Turner in Leeds, West Yorkshire. He kidnapped Leanne Turner while she was shopping in the city center on Christmas Eve 2000, took her home, and brutally murdered her. Leanne's body was found 9 months later by Cleveland Police Inspector Jim Tate. Policeman Jim Tate told the press about the progress of the investigation, but no further information about John Taylor was available in connection with Vicky's case. To mark the second anniversary of Vicky's death, in September 2002, her mother, Deborah, held a press conference appealing for help from the media. In her heartbreaking speech, she shared the pain she had suffered since losing her child and how she had considered suicide because she could not bear the pain. After a long delay, a further investigation into Vicky's case was launched. However, when this investigation was carried out in August 2003, the results of Vicky's autopsy could not determine the cause of death. This was because Vicky's body had decomposed so badly over time that many of her body parts, including major organs and some bones, were missing. The subsequent investigation also found no signs of injury or abuse to Vicky. Later that year, Vicky's mother, Deborah, and stepfather Colin visited the site in Denny where Vicky's body was found to pay their respects. They were followed by reporters from ITV. In a 20-second video, Deborah can be seen fighting back tears as she says Vicky did not deserve to die like that. Gordon Lamp from Cleveland Police also said that despite 10 years having passed, they would continue to try to find the criminal responsible for Vicky's death. 10 years after Vicky's death on September 24, 2010, her parents spoke to reporters for information and discussed the emotional pain caused by the decade-long hunt for her killer. Her mother, Deborah, said she thinks about Vicky every day and cannot get over her loss. Vicky's mother, Deborah, died in 2015 at the age of 55 and will never know who was responsible for her daughter's death. In 2017, Cleveland Police, along with Crime Commissioner Barry Coppenshaw, applied for special funding from the Home Office to fund the investigation of 3 old criminal cases, including Vicky Glass's case. The story of Vicky Glass, it all started with her disappearance. But the reason why she was killed is still a big question. Currently, the mystery of Vicky's death is still unsolved, and this causes unbearable pain to her family and friends. People continue to search for answers and hope to catch the culprit responsible for Vicky's tragic death. But unfortunately, after all these years, the culprit is still not found.